Welcome back to Night City for an overdue twofer review of the Netrunner books, Guide to the Net and Brainware Blowout, both brought to you by Cyberpunk's favorite netrunner, Rache Bartmoss. Netrunners have always been one of the hardest classes to run, simply because they are best inside the net, leaving the rest of the party to guard their body. Like most Splat books, both of these enhance their character, but one is a direct tie into the CCG craze of the mid-90s, and the other is more about the digital world than enhancing the character. So how do they hold up after all these years? Well, keep logged in, because I'm Mr. Welch, and today we are looking into the very twisted mind of one Mr. Rache Bartmoss. First up chronologically is the Guide to the Net, one of the few books to have color pages mixed in with the black and white. The only other examples from what I've reviewed so far is the Chrome books a while back, and even then just a couple of them. Guide to the Net was released back in 1993, written by a combination of Edward Bolme, David Ackerman, Derek Quintanar, and Steve Sabrum, and I apologize if I got anybody's name wrong. Most of the interior art, as well as the cover, was done with computer graphics, with Silicon Graphics getting credit for the cover art and a large portion of the interior art as well. The book is beefy, with 152 pages of content. The Guide to the Net details the cyber world of the 2020 universe, covering not just the state of the net across the world, but also detailing some of the bigger power players in the net-running universe. The book has a ton of images, far more art than any of the other Cyberpunk books I've reviewed, with each one of the Netrunner avatars displayed, as well as a selection of data forts and 3D renderings of what each section of the net typically looks like. And there are typos galore. Spell checking was never Artal's strong point, but this book has some especially noticeable errors. The detail is majority fluff. It details every region rather thoroughly, talks about how much security can be expected and how stable the region is when running it, and any quirks of that particular region of the net. Since distance means nothing inside the net, the book does devote a large portion of how to jump from region to region, often under the pretext of being chased by the Netwatch police. The guide does go into quite a bit of analysis about the security and the detail on how to get to the different regions, a fact that is critical for a lot of Black Ops. The book is written from the narrative of Rache Bartmoss, obviously, and Mr. Bartmoss is a few screws loose of a functioning cyberdeck. He is obviously biased in his descriptions. He loves the more anarchistic regions and is quite disdainful of the secure corporate and government regions. His narration is deliberately skewed and unreliable. He's even called out on it by a few netrunners in the book itself. But it's his story, and it's obvious that he's making a large part of it up. It's up to you to determine what part of his tales are true and which parts are just too many 96-hour straight net runs fueled by caffeine injected directly into his brain. There's a few rules in the back about net running, but not many. Most of these rules are reserved for the next book in the video, obviously. The book is 99% information about the net around the world, leaving less than 10 pages for new programs or new ways to access the net. There is a section on micro runs, where instead of hacking a corporation's mainframe, instead you're going after an object like a cyberdeck, a cyber arm, or a smart car. These rules didn't go over well when it first came out, and while it gives the netrunners something new to do in the middle of Black Ops, it also gave them new abilities that could prove too powerful or absolutely useless depending on your game. Guide to the Net is one of the few games not on the Artal website, probably because of the color sections that preface every chapter. You can get it for about $50 secondhand on various websites if you are patient enough. Don't spend the $1,500 one guy wants on eBay right now. It's a good book, and if you have a netrunner on the party, it's almost mandatory. It opens up a new world for the GM that wasn't fleshed out until this release, and it is worth picking up just for the read. Now, fast forward to the distant future of 1996. Magic the Gathering has been tearing up the gaming scene with the newly released Ice Age expansion. TSR wasn't exactly turning heads with the new Dragonlance Saga edition, and the movie Boys was bombing hard at the box office, largely because of executive meddling and not because of the performances of the cast. Then suddenly it seems every company decided it had to have a CCG to capitalize on the success of Magic. Most of them were abject failures, but one of them was a critical success. That game was Netrunner. The success of Netrunner alone meant that compared to all the other CCG tie-in books from the other game companies in that dark period of gaming history, Brainware Blowout was actually pretty good. Where Guide to the Net was almost all fluff, Brainware Blowout is almost all crunch. Everything is ways to improve your cyberdeck with a ton of new options, new programs, new everything. Almost everything was taken from the card game, with a caveat at the very beginning that a lot of these programs in Netrunner would break the game in Cyberpunk. So pick and choose wisely. The book is filled with art from the card game, almost all of it being 3D rendered art. It's 90s 3D rendered art, so remember the movie Spawn? There's a reason why you don't. I don't know if the 90s weren't ready for 3D computer art or 3D computer art wasn't ready for the 90s, but regardless, that's not something we like to talk about. There's a lot of rehash from other books. The source book is devoted to putting all the rules from Netrunners in a single book. That means there's 128 pages just devoted to that one single role, with rules pulled from the original 2020 source book, Chromebook 3, Guide to the Net, and a few other crossovers that were included for completion. If you're playing a Netrunner, this is going to be your first purchase. It has rules for upgrading programs, creating programs, upgrading your deck, building your deck from scratch, converting Netrunner programs into Cyberpunk programs, and a whole list of hardware that will have your runner in an electronic diabetic coma. It's not kidding about high-powered gear in this book. There are programs that represent the rare cards from Netrunner that are far superior to the regular netrunning programs. There's killer programs that do double damage. Another simply destroys the program that it was targeting. There's Hellhound variants that not only eat your brain but follow you home and call the cops when they get there. The book introduces viruses and ambush programs. Those are for the more patient and destructive netrunners. Some of these programs are purely sadistic, and others upgrade the bad guy programs without the runner ever being the wiser. So use these programs with extreme caution. There's a section in the back about famous Cysops, system operators, from the card game. They range from enemies to allies to contacts in varying degrees of proficiency. Mike Pondsmith makes an appearance as Omni Kismet, an artificial reality designer, who's idolized because he makes awesome realities and lets anybody play with them to test out. There's also a section for physical gear for Netrunners, with some new vehicles, some drugs, and even a cyberdog and the Schlaghund. The book is available in print for $18 at the Artal website. The question isn't whether it's worth it, the question is why haven't you bought a copy yet? For less than $20, you've got a book that gives you everything you need to play one of the more difficult roles in Cyberpunk. Everything is at the player's fingertips. Even if you ban a good chunk of the Netrunner editions, that's about 100 pages of stuff that the runner and the GM can still use. I was doing Rocker Boy next, but my copy has turned up missing. It's a good chance it died in the fire right after Harvey. So instead I'm going to go down the list to the next pair of books with Near Orbit and Deep Space, taking the game, well, into orbit. I've got 11 weeks to review 12 books, so it's time to step up my game.